everyone. My name is Nina. Welcome to the Down the Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm here tonight with my producer, Edgar. I don't know if he has a mic or anything.
I don't.
So he says that he does not. But I'm here with Edgar tonight. I'm sorry that it's been a little while since I've done this podcast, although I guess that's just par for the course with me. I did actually try to do this podcast from my apartment last week. But I had issues. I was trying to use my cell phone as a webcam. Apparently that is not an easy thing to do in and of itself, and so that was a mistake. I wasted a lot of time trying to get my cell phone to function that way. And I had set up the whole studio. I had this on a monitor behind me in my apartment, and I still managed to not be able to give you content last week. So I'm sorry about that. But I am here tonight, and I am happy to be back. So thank you for tuning in and watching. The first thing I'd like to talk about, as the title card indicates here, are the lockdowns. I have this letter that was sent to the president. It was signed by almost 600 physicians, and it's only about a page and a half long, so I'll just read that to you guys in a little bit. But I also want to talk a little bit about our governor and what's happening in Colorado with our lockdown, what stage of that we're in. And then later, I'll talk about the role of government in my Propertarian Manifesto, the Property Manifesto. This is going to be my least favorite segment to do of the Property Manifesto because I'm basically going to justify the existence of government. And I'm sure that Edgar will hate me after this. This is the podcast episode where Edgar loses respect for me for good. But I'm going to try to frame it more as what the role of a government should be. Not like why a government's necessarily a good thing, but if you're going to have a government, what it should actually do. So I'll get to that later. And then finally, we're going to go a little bit funkier with my spiritual section here. I'm going to talk about some Marian apparitions, mostly because they've become a lot more popular on Twitter and on YouTube recently. I think that people feel like these times are almost like the end times or something. So we're going to talk about some Marian apparitions that talk about some prophecies that, you know, maybe they're happening in our times, maybe they're just, you know, more symbolic, whatever, but I wanted to throw that out there to you guys tonight. It's something that I've been researching in my own time, and I think that my listeners will be they'll enjoy some of the content of these apparitions. I'll just preview that. So let's talk about our governor real quick. He's been doing these press conferences, which I don't know why I keep subjecting myself to them. I really should stop because they're not short either. They're like at least 45 minutes, and I still will watch the whole thing. And it just enrages me, so I don't know why I do that. Anyway, in any event, he was out there, and I can't believe what a clown world we live in. Just for an example, so, you know, when we were locked down, we were under a safe-at-home order, right? Like or stay-at-home order, excuse me. So the order was you stay at home, you don't leave unless it's an essential thing or whatever. Not that I abided by that. Sorry, I didn't. It's not a law anyway. That's a whole other thing. But now, as we start to open up, we've transitioned into what our governor calls safer at home. But he went on this whole rant the other day, I think it was Monday's press conference, about how you're actually not safer at home. Like the sunlight, the vitamin D, the fresh air, all of that is actually good for your immune system, and the virus transmits easier indoors. And so he went on this whole thing about how that's why it's so important to like wear masks in grocery stores and stuff because it transmits indoors worse. And go outside, like please go outside, he said. Which is just like, are we safer at home? I don't think so. You kind of just said that we're not. You yourself said that, Governor Polis. Also, I'd like to just address Governor Polis personally for a moment, okay? He made a comment about, I don't know if you saw this video, Edgar, of all the people on the Boulder Creek. Yeah. So there were like hundreds of people along Boulder Creek. They were fishing, they were chilling. People weren't wearing masks or social distancing or anything. And similarly, at Cherry Creek Reservoir, there were tons of people there. Like, there was a photo, and Cherry Creek Reservoir was packed. And someone did call the police on them, on the people who were there. But I don't think they gave them any tickets, and they told them to disperse. But even after that, there were still a few people milling around at Cherry Creek Reservoir. So, you know, a lot of people in Colorado, the weather is starting to just get to that time of year where it's just beautiful out, you know? It's not so hot yet where, you know, you really have to have sunscreen and it gets unbearable outside. It's just really nice, high of 75, sunny, and but Coloradans have basically been told that they can't go to parks, like they can't go fishing, they can't do anything in the mountains. It's like Coloradans are not going to listen to that. And I think that these things made that clear because that was in Boulder, all right? That was Boulder County. That wasn't even in like a conservative or like libertarian quote unquote area in Colorado. But this goes to Governor Polis because he called those people ignorant and selfish. And I just think that that's ridiculous and a disgusting thing to say about Coloradans who are doing nothing but just going outside like you told them to do and enjoying the fresh air and all of the beautiful things that Colorado has to offer, like these rivers, like, you know, Boulder is a beautiful place, you know, the Flatirons up there, going hiking up there. Just let people do what they want to do, man. Even you admitted that it's safer outside. So just get over yourself. These people aren't selfish. They just want to enjoy Colorado. It's like, why do we live here if we can't enjoy what Colorado is? Anyway, so as this virus thing has progressed, right? I mean, I probably shouldn't even say virus because they might just knock me off the air on YouTube. But as this crisis has progressed, it's been a situation where a doctor here and there will come out and then YouTube or whatever will censor that, and you know, the video will have gotten like 1 million views of a doctor saying, I don't know if I trust these lockdowns. I don't know if this is a good idea. I don't know if it's good for our immune system. But now we have a letter that was signed by literally almost 600 MDs, okay? And this is addressed to President Trump. Now, I'm not sure, I think they just wrote it to President Trump because, I don't know, what are they going to write this to every governor, every mayor that's done something stupid? I mean, if they write it to the president, it's more like just this is about the whole country. And I just think that it's important for us to consider because it's not just a few wacko doctors that are not in favor of these lockdowns. It's a lot of MDs. These are people who understand the immune system, they understand biology, they understand viruses, they understand coronaviruses especially, because that's really a lot of MDs. If you go in for something like a cold, that's actually a coronavirus, you know? It's just a matter of degree of severity, but they're all in the same family. So MDs know a lot about this. So let's just go through this letter and see what these almost 600 medical doctors have to say to our president. Dear Mr. President, this is dated May 19th, 2020. Thousands of physicians in all specialties and from all states would like to express our gratitude for your leadership. We write to you today to express our alarm over the exponentially growing negative health consequences of the national shutdown. In medical terms, the shutdown was a mass casualty incident. During a mass casualty incident, victims are immediately triaged to black, red, yellow, or green. The first group, triage level black, includes those who require too many resources to save during a mass crisis. The red group has severe injuries that are survivable with treatment. The yellow group has serious injuries that are not immediately life-threatening, and the green group has minor injuries. The red group receives the highest priority, which makes sense. Their next priority is to ensure that the other two groups do not deteriorate to another level, which also makes sense. You want to keep those people who don't need treatment right now in a position where they don't need it. You don't want them to all of a sudden be in a position where if they don't get treatment, they're going to die, right? Decades of research have shown that by strictly following this algorithm, we save the maximum number of lives. Millions of Americans are already at triage level red. These include 150,000 Americans per month who would have had a new cancer detected through routine screening that has not happened. I don't know if you know that, but routine cancer screenings are elective, right? So they've been not occurring, during all of these lockdowns. Let's see. Millions who have missed routine dental care to fix problems strongly linked to heart disease, death, and preventable cases of stroke, heart attack, and child abuse. Suicide hotline phone calls have increased 600%. I paused because that number is pretty startling, so I wanted that to sink in. Tens of millions are at triage level yellow. Liquor sales have increased 300 to 600%. Cigarette sales have increased, rent has gone unpaid, family relationships have become frayed, and millions of well-child checkups have been missed. Hundreds of millions are at triage level green. These are people who currently are solvent, but at risk should economic conditions worsen. Poverty and financial uncertainty is closely linked to poor health, which also makes sense. A continued shutdown means hundreds of millions of people will downgrade a level. These are following real-life examples from our practices. Patient ES is a mother of 2 children whose office job was reduced to part-time and whose husband was furloughed. The father is drinking more. The mother is depressed and not managing her diabetes well. And the children are barely doing any of their schoolwork. Patient AF has chronic but previously stable health conditions. Her quote-unquote elective hip replacement surgery was delayed, which caused her to become nearly sedentary, resulting in a pulmonary embolism in April. Great. Patient RT is an elderly nursing home patient who had a small stroke in early March, but was expected to make a nearly complete recovery. Since the shutdown, he has had no physical or speech therapy and 0 visitors. He has lost weight and is deteriorating rather than making any progress. Patient SO is a college freshman who cannot return to normal life, school, or friendships. He risks depression, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, trauma, and future financial uncertainty. We are alarmed at what appears to be a lack of consideration for the future health of our patients. The downstream health effects of deteriorating a level are being massively underestimated and underreported. This is an order of magnitude error. It is impossible to overstate the short, medium, and long-term harm to people's health with a continued shutdown. Losing a job is one of life's most stressful events, and the effect on a person's health is not lessened because it has also happened to 30 million other people. Keeping schools and universities closed is incalculably detrimental for children, teenagers, and young adults for decades to come. The millions of casualties of a continued shutdown will be hiding in plain sight, but they will be called alcoholism, homelessness, suicide, heart attack, stroke, or kidney failure. In youths, it will be called financial instability, unemployment, despair, drug addiction, unplanned pregnancies, poverty, and abuse. Because the harm is diffuse, there are those who would like to hold that it does not exist. We, the undersigned, know otherwise. Please let us know how we may be of assistance. And this is respectfully signed by Simone Gold, MD, JD, and greater than 500 physicians. So I read the letter in full. I just think it's important to point out that for so long we've been told this diatribe. If it saves one life, we have to keep all of this crap closed, you know? But the truth is that keeping all of this closed is not saving even one life. It's not saving a few lives. It's not saving anyone. In fact, studies are starting to show, like our, lovely king, our governor said, that, it's actually safer outside. And it makes sense, in New York, the governor there has had to deal with the fact that he rushed all these people into nursing homes who hadn't been tested. He's like, we'll put all of these elderly people together. Some of them had it, and then it just wiped out tons of people in these nursing homes. I mean, these governors have taken these measures that they claim to be in the public interest, but I mean, they have blood on their hands, really. The biggest absurdity to me are these places that are trying to close beaches. Because I don't know if you know, but this virus actually can't survive temperatures higher than 80 degrees. So, Like if you're in SoCal, like if you're in San Diego at a beach, yeah, in the winter, maybe it's not 80 degrees every day. But let's be real, we're almost at June. If you're at a beach in Southern California, it's going to be hotter than 80 degrees there. And the CDC also, I don't know if you guys saw this, came out today and said that the virus likely can't actually be transmitted on surfaces like they thought. Might be kind of relevant. Because that would mean at the beach, the only kind of transmission possible would be person to person. And in that instance, when you're outside, it's really unlikely that that would happen anyway. But these places, you know, they just think that they can deprive people of fun. That's really where we've gotten. It's not a matter of health anymore. Shutting down the beaches is not a matter of health. The data does not support that. This virus cannot be transmitted in hot temperatures. I don't know if you guys saw in Spain, one of the beaches in Spain, they covered the beach in bleach. It's like, I mean, do we care about the environment? Like, how many species of, you know, critters live on a beach that were then exposed to, like, bleach? These are the people who care about being green. Okay, so we have to take a step back here and just think about what is actually a reasonable response given the data that we have now. Given that we see suicide hotline phone calls are up 600%. How is that not, you know, the headline on the news? Why do 600 doctors have to write a letter for us to find out information like this? Liquor sales up 300 to 600%. Think about how much drinking that is. It's not like Americans weren't drinking before this, okay? That's a lot of liquor. I mean, I cannot wrap my head around the damage that has been done because people have not been able to, first of all, get cancer screenings. But I don't know if you know about this, chemotherapy was deemed to be elective for many cancers that weren't at a certain stage. But some of those people with cancer have progressed to a place where now they're terminal. So if it saves one life, it's like, well, what about these lives? What about these people committing suicide? You know, it's the lives that they want to focus on. And one last thing before I move on to my next segment. This happened in Colorado. I don't know if it's going to happen in other states, but I'm sure it will. They did some auditing of the death numbers. And they found out that they were being overstated, mostly because they were reporting deaths of anyone who had COVID, even if it wasn't the cause of death. And so we had around, and this was a few days ago, so pardon me if the stats aren't perfect right now, but we had around 1,160 deaths in Colorado. But when they did that audit, it was revised down to 880. So, I don't know. That's a decent amount. That's not just like, oh, it was like 10 or 15 deaths were misreported. You know, that's upwards of 30%. I mean, my math right now, it's rough. Because I've had a migraine since these lockdowns started. What's that been, like 8 weeks? I'm sure that's good for my health too. But I just want to point out the numbers are in a place where they're being overreported because of, like I said, it's if you died with COVID, or in some places, if you interacted with someone who tested positive for COVID, they will write that on your death certificate. And I did see that on Nextdoor even, which is it's an app that it's like social media for your neighborhood. But someone on Nextdoor from my neighborhood reported that their sister had a heart attack and died, and then she saw the death certificate and saw that it said COVID on it. And she was like, I was there. Like, I took my sister to the hospital because she was having a heart attack, and her death certificate says COVID. So I'm sure that there's a lot of doctors who are doing the right thing. But there's been incentives to write that on death certificates because the hospitals that have more cases The hospitals that have more deaths, they get more funding because, oh, the crisis is really severe here, So you don't have to take my word for it on this information. I mean, I would appreciate if you took the word of those nearly 600 physicians. Don't listen to me. I read their words about the kind of damage that these lockdowns are doing to our society. But all that I ask is that if you have been super vigilant and pro these lockdowns this whole time, like, I get it. It was scary. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know if this was like the plague or something. I get it, okay? But we are at a place now where we can take a step back and look objectively at the data and realize that the measures that we're taking are nuts in relation to what the danger actually is. And we desperately need to at least have some skepticism of our government officials, okay? You don't have to be as extreme as me and like Edgar. Like, yeah, we've distrusted the state and hated the state for like kind of a long time, all right? But this is one of those times where, like, as average Americans, you have to look at some of this stuff and be like, do my government officials really have my best interest at heart? And I don't think that you can honestly say they do when these are the situations that they're causing. And when they refuse to admit that they've made any errors, like they just want to think that they are kings, right? Even our mayors think that they have the authority to order you and to boss you around and to tell you how to live your life. Mayors have no authority to write law, neither do governors, and our legislatures are being derelict in their duties by letting all of these executive, offices write law. They need to be telling police officers that none of this should be enforced because none of that is law. Laws are passed by the legislator. I mean, people have forgotten basics like Schoolhouse Rock. How does a bill become a law, people? It's not by the governor or the mayor writing something and just telling people how to live their life. This is, if something's going to be enforced at gunpoint, where you can risk fines, jail, all of that, it has to be something that's passed by the representatives of, the state, of that jurisdiction. We have a body that is responsible for writing law. And it's not as if they can't write an emergency law if they really have to. But the truth is that something this severe, especially in Colorado, would have never been agreed upon. Shutting down all of our economy like this, we have basically a service economy in this country, and then all these governors make all these service jobs illegal. And then when all of these people can't pay rent and can't pay for food, they just call them selfish and stupid. And these governors and mayors are going to be in a world of hurt come November. They don't understand it. These swing states that have Democrat governors with lockdowns right now, I think these states are going to go red. I think Colorado probably will go red. And I know that's a bold prediction, but they've really overplayed their hand here. And I understand the fear. There's a lot of people I respect who have been really scared and who have said things that I can't believe that they said these things, and have been worried about things that personally I think are kind of ridiculous. But I just beg you, just be a little bit skeptical. Just a little. You don't have, maybe you don't ultimately agree with me, but just take a few minutes to say to yourself, is it possible that my government is lying to me? And given their history, I think it's pretty obvious that the answer is yes. And if it's possible, though, that they're lying to you, is it really a good idea for us to be so lax about letting the Bill of Rights just get, burned in front of our eyes? I mean, it's just getting thrown in a dumpster fire as if any time that there's a disease that might kill someone, that it's just, the Bill of Rights is just suspended. It's like, do you believe that? Do you want that to be the precedent for mayors and governors in the future that anytime they perceive a threat, they can just decide, they can write an order and tell you how to live your life. Tell you that you have to cover your face in public. Tell you that you can't go to the park. I don't know. Just, if you can't, if pondering those questions for a few minutes gives you too much mental anguish, I'm sorry, but I just beg you, just try. Just try for me, okay? For the sake of our liberties in this country not being erased forever, just have a little skepticism, just a touch. It won't kill you, I promise. Okay, so let's talk about my least favorite part of the Property Manifesto, which is the role of government. And I seriously hate this. I should have done this earlier in the Property Manifesto segments, but I've just dreaded doing it so much that I've just kept pushing it back. But I'm just gonna get it out of the way. And I think that it's a great opportunity, given how much our property rights are being infringed right now, to talk about what a real government, a proper government, would be doing in a crisis like this. I can do some comparisons to what our government's doing and what a propertarian government would do. So, libertarians, we've all kind of said, or had this adage, libertarians that aren't anarchists, sorry, have had this adage that the role of government is to defend liberty. And that's true. Ron Paul has said that. But I would say more specifically that the role of government is to defend our property rights. Okay? Now, a lot of people come at me like, how can an entity that uses force do that? And I'd like to pose an example. We're going to start real close to home. We're going to start with the smallest possible government. So, let's say you live in a neighborhood, right? There's no big overarching government yet. This is back in the Old West and shit, where people did the rush out to Oklahoma to get their 1 acre or whatever, and you ended up with a bunch of people kind of in one area because you all have, one of you is really good at farming, one of you is a blacksmith or whatever. You're all sharing resources and you live in kind of a small little neighborhood. Maybe there's only 20 houses there, right? But there's some other people nearby who, there might be some bandits around, right? And sometimes they come to your little town and they burgle homes or whatever. And people don't really like that. And maybe one of the guys in your town is a really good shot. He's buff. And he's done a good job defending his house from these, I don't know, bandits who are coming through, right? We're talking about Old West. I just love the Old West. I'm getting a lever action rifle soon, so the Old West has been on my mind. But okay, so let's say you have that kind of guy there. If the rest of the people in those 20 homes decide, we want to pay this person to defend our homes from potential bandits. What is that person then, right? That guy's a cop. You just created a cop. Even if he doesn't have the force of a court behind him, what you've done is say, this guy can use force against bandits who come into our little neighborhood. And I don't see a problem with a neighborhood of people electing to have an individual have that authority in their neighborhood, right? And so, I'm not an anarchist. Personally, I think that the closer you get to the individual, the better, right? This whole huge federal government that we have is bonkers. Absolutely wacko. The people who are running your life don't know anything about you. The idea that we would have an international government is absolutely absurd. I mean, that is just a recipe for disaster. Those people couldn't protect your property rights even if they wanted to, right? But so in essence, the kind of government I'm in favor of, to the extent that it has to exist, because I do think that ultimately any entity that uses force does have some evil in it, right? But at the same time, if there's like little old ladies in a neighborhood who want to hire a guy to make sure that if someone tries to burgle their house, they're protected, I don't really see a problem with that. Now, the only time that that person would be justified in acting and wouldn't be going outside of the scope of what a just government would do is when they're acting in defense of a property right that individual would be justified in defending themselves. Okay? So this is part of the problem with what our government does now. All right? It's not like our government just prosecutes people who commit acts of violence or acts of aggression against others. It's not like they're just fighting burglars or murderers or rapists, right? It's like they're putting people in jail for doing drugs, you know? They're putting people in jail for, I don't know, like what's going on right now? People are getting put in jail for taking their kids to play at a playground, you know, for opening a nail salon or a hair salon. And these are not acts of aggression against anyone else's property. And so any time where a government is acting in a way where the property owner in question would not be justified in acting with force would be an illegitimate act of government. That would mean that the government is now the criminal themselves. Because like Bastiat really talked about in the law, the government really shouldn't be able to do anything that a private citizen couldn't do, you know? And in my opinion, there are times when it's okay for me to use force against some other people, right? If someone breaks into my home in the middle of the night, I think I can use force against that person. I think I can use deadly force against that person. Same thing, if some guy, like I'm walking down the street at night in Denver, some guy tries to sexually assault me, I think I am more than justified in using deadly force against that person. And so all I'm saying is that if a group of individuals wants to elect that a certain person could come in, or a certain group of people could come in, especially for those individuals who, you know, a lot of people made this argument on Twitter before that your rights are only as good as what you can defend and protect. Like your property rights really only extend as far as you can protect them. And in some ways that's true. But part of me does believe that it would be kind of a dystopic world where, like, you know, I mean, unfortunately both of my grandmothers have passed. But there was a time when one of my grandmothers lived by herself, and I don't want to live in a world where, you know, it's like, well, she's not allowed to make sure that she lives in a place where there's a group of people who would help protect her property rights, help protect her property of body, as in her life, her real estate, you know, from burglary, trespass, whatever. There's some people who really are not capable of doing that. Like, and it's not their fault. And it's not a situation where I'm like, because of certain, you know, characteristics, immutable characteristics, people can't do that. It's more so just that, I mean, personally, I think I'm pretty capable of defending my property because, you know, I train with my firearms and I have them and, you know, I can do that. But not everyone is in that position. And I do think that it's not an evil. Like, if let's go back to the example where maybe I might get sexually assaulted walking around in Denver. If I didn't carry a firearm, right, but some guy saw that I was getting, you know, molested on the street and I couldn't get out of it, and he took out a gun and shot that guy, I think that guy was more than justified to use deadly force against the potential rapist as well. I mean, is he not? Is he not allowed to protect someone else who's vulnerable? So all I'm saying is that, yes, force is bad, generally, right? And even in that instance, he still committed an act of violence against someone else. It's not as if he didn't commit a homicide. It's just that it was justifiable because he was stopping an act of violence against me, right? When I, in that situation, couldn't defend myself. So that's what a government should do. A government should be the guy who shoots the rapist when I can't get him off of me. That's what a government should be, right? And it's the same thing with stuff like fraud. We can all agree that fraud, not necessarily that it's like aggression, but it certainly is an act of deceit, right? And I think many like anarchists too would agree that fraud is something that would be a violation, you know, of like the rights of the other person, right? It's like, or Edgar, will you agree that fraud's not a good thing in Ancapistan? Yeah. Okay. So so similarly, this is where I get into stuff like courts, and I want to address some arguments that I get a lot about this. I want to agree that we could privatize the actual court proceedings, right? The part that is adjudicating who was in the wrong, right? The whole King Solomon, I'll split the baby because that way I'll figure out who really cares about it. Like that whole process, yeah, that can be private and arbitration. Arbitration's really hot. It's hot in the legal field too. People love writing those arbitration clauses in contracts. They think they're so like spicy and fun. And sometimes they really are great, like especially for technology. Like if you have a case, like maybe you're an engineer, like an aerospace engineer, and you're in some kind of patent lawsuit between, you know, engineer companies, something like that. Maybe it would be better to have a judge or an arbitrator that actually understands all of that science instead of a lay jury, especially if that's what the two parties want. And I think that's totally fine. And that's always what people say to me when I say that there's a problem of enforcement. And that's where the government comes in, okay? So the issue with enforcement is that it kind of requires force. Like if you're going to enforce property rights, like there has to be a consequence for the violation of that. And if there is a consequence for the violation of that, we want to make sure that the consequences are not unjust for the crime committed, right? Like, this is part of the reason why back in the day, they reined in judges with their sentencing stuff, although that ended up causing other problems because they wrote in mandatory sentences, and that was a whole mess, right? But before they had any sentencing guidelines, judges in the South, you know, they would give a white guy probation and they'd like sentence a black guy to like life in prison for the same offense. And so a lot of people will say like, oh, we could just have these competing insurance companies. And I'll be like, well, but who sets the standard for what the penalty is though? Like who sets the standard for what the penalty is for trying to rape somebody? Or should there, like, personally I think that there should be an understanding and expectation of what kind of penalty or punishment you'll receive if you commit a crime. It's one of the fundamentals of our rule of law is that you know and understand that what the kind of consequences are for your actions, you know? And even if maybe you're not fully read up on the whole thing, and I'm sure that I'll get people who are like, ignorance of the law is no excuse, blah, blah, blah. But in general, if you murder someone, you kind of know that that's going to be a pretty rough penalty, right? Whereas if you just shoplift something, like if you stole like $10 worth of merchandise, I mean, really, should you be in prison for that? Probably not, you know? So there has to be some consistency across punishment. It's part of the rule of law. It's part of kind of due process too. Part of making sure that one person who, if you committed the same crime as someone else in the same country, that you get the same punishment, right? Or at least in the same jurisdiction. the whole countries thing. I mean, countries, states, counties, whatever. But there should be an expectation and understanding of what kind of penalty you're going to get for a crime that you commit. So that's part of my problem with that. Who sets the stand without a government? Who sets the standard for what the penalty should be? Now, I want to make clear that, and this is a Thomas Jefferson adage, right? But the authority of the government has to come from the consent of the governed. Always. And that's why I use an example of a neighborhood where those people come together and choose to create that government. It was their elective choice, right? So I just want to make that clear. It's not a situation where some dude can just come in, roll into a neighborhood and be like, hey, I'm the government of this here territory now, y'all. And I'm the one who gets to decide the law. It's like, no. The law is actually decided by the people. And then they have an entity that can enforce that. And the reason why they have the monopoly on the use of force is because you don't want anyone else committing acts of violence, right? And quite frankly, the only thing the government is good at is force. So let's put them to use where force is actually appropriate, which is in the defense of property rights. Okay? So, because it's true. It's all the government can do is use force. And this gets me back to the whole idea about the arbitration, right? So binding arbitration, that gets thrown at me all the time. I love it. I love arbitration. It's good stuff. Binding arbitration, perfect. What happens when someone gets an order against them in a binding arbitration and they refuse to comply with it? What happens? I've never had an anarchist answer this, other than going into the insurance company situation. Perhaps Edgar has an answer.
Repeat it.
Okay.
Just so I understand it.
Edgar wants to make sure he understands the question fully. So, you go to a binding arbitration, right? Which is good. I like those. I'm in favor of those. You get a judgment against someone because they breached a contract, right? The arbitrator says they owe you $100K. Here's a judgment in your favor. And that person's like, I'm not going to pay it. What do you do?
There's really not much you can do, honestly.
Right, because there's no enforcement mechanism.
Well, even now, I mean, O.J. Simpson still owes millions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, the whole judgment in terms of monetary stuff is hard. Although, you know, OJ, of course, can get away with it. Smaller people, they'll just garnish your wages and, you know, take everything from you. But that's kind of the issue, right? It's true. It's like, how do you get someone to comply with something like that unless they want to? And people will be like, oh, well, I got an arbitration judgment and they complied. It's like, well, good for you. I'm glad that you had an opposing party that didn't try to cheat you and that they were honest. But I gotta tell you, I worked for the courts, okay? The amount of times that an arbitration judgment ended up on my desk because one of the parties refused to comply with the judgment was all the frickin' time. People will not pay like $100,000 to someone else unless they kind of have to. People don't want to admit that they're wrong. People don't want to say that they committed fraud, you know? And similarly, like, okay, so let's say you have these situations where it's like, okay, someone tried to commit a rape. We have an insurance company that says that, you know, a rapist gets penalized with X amount of years of time. It's like, what if he doesn't show up to, I mean, who are the jails private, I guess? That's, you know, it's like, are they incentivized to make profits? Or are there no jails? And if that's the case, is the penalty for something like rape just monetary? I don't know. See, these are all things, it's like, I think that if someone is a serial rapist or just any kind of rapist, they should be removed from society. That's someone who force should be used against. Same thing with murderers and burglars and robbers and fraudsters and, you know, and it's the same thing with even even with our politicians who commit war crimes and stuff, it's like these people should be in prison. They are dangerous to other people. They've committed acts of violence against other people. And I go into all of that, and I know that I haven't really talked about property specifically yet, but I had to kind of preface it with that so that you can understand the next things I'm going to talk about. So, if you're going to have a mechanism to defend your real property, which is your land, your personal property, like my purse, my wallet, right? I'm a little old lady walking down the street. Some guy steals my purse. Oh, he stole my purse. Like, you know, she might be lucky and have like a great like bystander nearby who's a concealed carry person who helps her out and like gets that purse back. But I think that it's perfectly reasonable to have an entity that can actually do a bit of force where force would be appropriate on behalf of that individual's property. I think that it's abundantly clear in the case of property of body that you should be able to do that as well. Like I've used the example of rapists and murderers a lot. Those are the ultimate violations of your property of body, right? Your property of mind, I mean, the government's way to protect this is just basically to not freaking spy on us. And, you know, the property of mind stuff, a lot of it is in the Bill of Rights, you know. Your right to free speech, your right to religion, all of that. It's like the government should not be able to make laws. Like even your legislature, even those representatives of you who can write law, they still shouldn't be able to write any laws that basically would make the government invalid, right? And that's why in Marbury v. Madison, even though that case has other problems, but in Marbury v. Madison, the justice who wrote that case said that any law that is repugnant to the Constitution is no law at all. But it's not just because that judge declared it so, but it's because what the Constitution set out to do, I mean, it's failed because it's been interpreted and perverted and spun forever, just into oblivion, and to where it's actually created a bigger government, right? But what the Constitution intended to do was to create a government that, had limited powers, and then these certain rights can't be infringed. But those certain rights that couldn't be infringed, really, those are property rights. Like they weren't able to really articulate it all the way, but they were trying to say, we're creating a government that protects property rights, and that's the purpose of it, right? Like even in the powers of the Constitution, the things that they give the federal government authority to do, it's like, even the clauses that I kind of hate that have been perverted a lot, like the Interstate Commerce Clause, if you think about why that was probably written, it's like, we want the free exchange of trade, right, which is your right to convey your personal property, right? So we want that process across states to be as easy as possible, and so we want the government to be able to facilitate that. And that's even for a clause in the Constitution that I really think has been abused. But the point is that our founders tried to create a government that was the freest government in the history of the world. And they did do that. But they failed to completely articulate, in my opinion, specifically what the role of the government is. Like Thomas Jefferson did a great job in the Declaration of Independence, you know. The government, you know, their authority comes from the consent of the governed. You know, we have these inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, you know. But the government, the only thing the government can legitimately do is use force in a way that is also legitimate where an individual would do it. Because like I said with Bastiat, if an individual can't do it, then why on earth should the government be able to? But we have gotten so far past that, right? I mean, our governor has written an executive order saying that You can't go more than 10 miles from your house for anything other than essential activities. Now, this violates a lot of property rights. I mean, it basically is telling me that even though I have a car, there's a limitation on how far I can drive it. Even within my own state, even within a state where they've robbed me for the sake of the roads that they're prohibiting me to drive on past a certain distance, right? Let's think about some of the other executive orders that have been happening, at least in Colorado. And this is all over the place, I guess, too. But you can't dine in a fine dining restaurant anymore. So basically what you're saying is if you are a restaurateur and you own land, you no longer have the right to decide who comes to your property and when, right? Like your ability to control your property, your right to control, your right to exclude from, your right to enjoy, all of that is completely limited. You can't use your real estate that's a restaurant for serving food to individuals at a table anymore. So that also violates your rights in terms of your personal property. You can't sell food to people who want to purchase it from you. You can't use the tables and chairs within your own restaurant to have diners sit there. So all that's a huge violation. Your property of body, the biggest property of body violation we have is this damn forced masks situation. I mean, if you want to wear a mask, fine. Especially if you're immunocompromised or something, you really should be. But it is a violation of my property of body to order me to wear a mask. You can't force me to put something on my face. It's the same problem I have with burqas and all this other crap in Sharia law countries. It's like, don't order a woman that she has to cover her hair for her own safety. That's insane, and we shouldn't do it here either. And then the whole property of mind thing. Think about how much our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech, our right to protest, our right to assemble have just been annihilated. So we basically have a government right now that is doing the exact opposite of its purpose, man. Like, our government is violating all of the rights that they're supposed to be protecting. And it's really a tragic situation. And that's why I think that it's always better to get it closer and closer to the individual. Because in that example I had with like the neighborhood watch cop guy, if that guy or his like crew of maybe 3 guys really started to get out of hand, they could overpower that guy and throw him out and, do whatever they needed. But what are you supposed to do? Like, I watched Waco, right? Because I didn't hate the government enough. So I decided to watch Waco because that was a smart choice. And in that situation, there was a line in there where it's like, what do you do when your government is the one who's driving a tank into your, like, ranch home? It's like, it's a good point. This government is too big. This government is so far detached from the individuals that they're supposed to serve. So personally, like, my ideal government would be way smaller. It would be like more like at the county level where if someone messed something up, you could throw that motherfucker out of office like that, and it would be easy. But instead, they keep trying to push government further away, right? They're trying to do that now. It's like, we're listening to stuff from the World Health Organization, from the UN. It's like those people are more out of touch with what's happening with average people all around the world than almost anybody. Those people are in such huge ivory towers. And it's the same thing with our federal government right now. People are totally fine with Trump acting like a king, and they were fine with Obama acting like a king too. They're fine with Congress lying to them all the time. They're fine with Congress abdicating their authority regarding war and regarding all of this stuff to the president, Like, they've all just been derelict in their duties, and we've done nothing about it. But the truth is, just like the neighborhood, where the people in those neighborhoods should be able to throw out whatever little cop they hired, we, the states, should be able to throw out our government. And I think that in terms of the consent of the governed, I do think that that should be able to be withdrawn to a certain extent. So, Coloradans, right? It's like we've given our governor a certain amount of consent to govern Colorado. But all those people up in Boulder Creek, those people are not consenting to his governance anymore. They're not consenting to the governance of whatever mayor ordered them that they're not allowed to go be outside at a river without a mask on, you know? And I actually think that that's what's going to happen ultimately with these lockdowns, is that people are just going to stop caring, man. And the truth is, once you lose the faith of the people, you can't enforce almost anything anymore. You know? So governments who really overstep their authority like this, especially the way that our governors and mayors are just drunk with power, these governments are not legitimate. They're not serving their purpose. They're not using force in a way that's appropriate. And I agree that the only thing the government can do is force. So they should be like, let's put them to the task to use force where force is appropriate. Because they're really good at that. It's all they're good at. Like, again, with Waco. They're not good at negotiating. They're not good at understanding how to talk to people. But what they're really good with is, like, you know, blasting a building with tear gas and blowing that crap up. You know, it's like, so in terms of if a government, like, in terms of, is a government good at punishing a rapist? Like, yeah, they're pretty good at punishing people. That's pretty much all they can do. So what we as a people, though, need to do is to be vigilant in making sure that our governments actually stay to this charge. This is one of the things that's been so sad in America. People are totally fine with the powers that the government's taking. Like I begged for in the beginning of this podcast, people have no skepticism regarding their leaders, even though they know they've been lied to over and over and over again. So, you know, if you're trying to have a small government, you have to have people who are going to be vigilant in keeping it that way, which is why I am vigilant about it. I try to be. I try to do as much as I can to shrink government to the extent that I can. I talk about this stuff. I try to help people understand the crimes that the government commits against its people. Because governments commit crimes against their people, just like people commit crimes against other people. And when government officials do that, they should be brought to justice and put in jail, just like any other person who committed a crime, or any other person who used force in a way that was not justified or excusable. So, anyway, that is the property rights exploration of the role of government. And trust me when I say that I really don't like defending the government at all, okay? Like, this is the only time I'm gonna do that. But it had to be done once. But now it's over with. I could go back to talking about how the government has been fucking everything up, which they have been. And with that, let's move to the next topic. Although, let's see, I have some stuff in the comments. 42 Chilled says, amen. Thank you. I'm not sure when exactly you sent that, but it was to something I said, so thank you. Isn't Shooter's Grill open in Rifle Co.? They closed, Edgar says. I'm sorry, I wasn't familiar with that. But that sounds sad. Was it a cool place?
I had never been there. Their gimmick was their servers are carrying guns.
Oh. Yeah. That's always what you want in a restaurant. Let's see. He has a few comments here. The coronavirus BS seems like China/Dems cooked it up for a mail-in election fraud in 2020. Then we may have a true revolution, sadly. I was skeptical of this idea, and I'm still not sure if I really think that they cooked it up for that purpose. But some of these governors are now like, maybe I'll just keep my state locked down till November 5th. It's like, just keep it right through that election, huh? I don't really think that, I don't think that it was a virus that was concocted and released for the sake of all these lockdowns. It's more of a situation of evil people not letting a crisis go to waste. And testing the American people to see what we'll put up with. I think this is a big test. And a lot of places are failing miserably, and I think that they'll have some really frightening authoritarian governments in response. Let's see. People have already stopped caring weeks, months ago. Every locality is different. Many are already at business as usual. Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting there. We're getting there. But there's a lot of people who are still really scared, man. And I'm not sure what it's going to take to wake them up, you know? Like, it doesn't seem as if the epidemiologists and the scientists and the, you know, none of that is sinking in. And, like, really smart people that I trust and, you know, have looked up to just freaking lost their minds over this. And I don't know what's going to wake people up. What I do know is that hysterias don't last forever. They can last for a long time, but they don't last forever. And after they're over, then people write history books about how frickin' insane everybody was during that time. And just remember, you know, being someone who is calm during a hysteria makes you in the very small minority, okay? So if you have not been scared shitless by this, like if you haven't had the living daylight scared out of you by Dr. Fauci and all these people who told us that millions of people would be dead by now, even if we locked down, right? What was I about to say? Darn it. Will you tell me what I said right before that? Will you help me? Edgar, no! It was such a good point. It'll come to me. Yeah. It'll come to me later. You've been trusting all of these things, but as more data comes out, how have you not changed any perception on it? It's like they've doubled down. They're even more scared now, you know? I understand maybe trusting these numbers in the beginning, but they've been proven wrong. South Dakota never closed. There's no crisis there, man. In fact, I did some research and found out that of the states that never closed at all, most of them were Midwest states, one of which was Iowa and like a few other places. Some of them were equally dense as Colorado. All of those states combined have less deaths than Colorado by itself. And they had no lockdown. So that means collectively they had less than 1,000 deaths. And I just think it's like, how many people are now going to die of cancer who might have been able to survive because they couldn't go to the hospital to get a cancer screening or get chemo? You know? This is just ridiculous. Yeah, it's not the flu, it's a different disease, but it's about as deadly as that. That's what I listened to this German epidemiologist, okay, talk for like 2 hours about how viruses transmit and this particular virus and data from all these countries, like the death rate is about like the flu. Like, so this season we pretty much had a double flu, right? Because we had a flu season that was kind of bad, and then we have this new disease that has a death rate that's about as bad as the flu, maybe 1.5 times, something like that. But I mean, people are acting like it's the plague. People are acting like if you get this, you die, period. It's just not true. Most people don't even have symptoms. More than 50% of people who get it won't even know they had it. And we're acting like, don't breathe air outside, you know? It's just bonkers. So anyway, I've ranted about that a lot. It's been on my mind a lot. I can't believe that this is what has us basically at some weird commie fascism thing, is this bug. You know, it's like a virus. A virus is just what made us like throw the Bill of Rights out the window, you know? Anyway, it's just bonkers. So let's talk about Sumerian apparitions. So this is some of the stuff where we're getting into some of the more mysticism. Some of this stuff is things that even practicing Catholics get a little bit skeptical of, although the two things that I'm about to talk about, the two apparitions I'm going to talk about right now, are approved by the Catholic Church, by the Vatican. And the way that that process works is that the local bishop has to do an investigation to decide if the apparition actually happened and yada yada. But these are verified by the Catholic Church, so they're not just like fringe. No one really believes this stuff. It's just I just wanted to make that clear. Now, if you don't know what I mean by a Marian apparition, okay? So, right, Jesus, all right, born to Mary, Blessed Virgin, all of that. We have readings in the book of Revelation that kind of indicate that Mary is the Queen of Heaven, which would make sense because in old Jewish culture, pre-Jesus, it wouldn't actually be the king's wife who was the queen, it would be his mother, right? And so, and then whoever became the next king, that's when the wife of the king would become the queen, right? Because now she's the mother of the son who was the heir or whatever, right? So the whole idea with the Marian apparitions is like we have the Queen of Heaven making an appearance on earth, right? And so again, this is where we get to a place where people are like, whoa, that's all just some crazy like spiritual mumbo jumbo. But the first one I want to talk about, Fatima, this is very well documented. It's on film. You end up not being able to see like Mary specifically, but it's a situation where, because by the time it was filmed, this last apparition I'm going to talk about, hundreds of people had heard that Mary had been appearing in Fatima. And so on camera, people are just standing in this field watching, and then all of a sudden they're just blinded by this really bright light, you know? And everyone who's there testified to hearing the same message. Anyway, it's crazy stuff. So let's talk about some of this more weird, wild aspects of the Catholic faith, shall we? So, and you'll realize why I wanted to talk about this once I read the things that the Blessed Virgin warned us about. They're pretty relevant to our times. So, between May 13th and October 13th in 1917, 3 Portuguese children received apparitions of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Fatima, which is in Portugal. It's about 110 miles north of Lisbon, if you're curious. So there were 3 kids, Francisco, Jacinta, and Lucia, right? So basically the Blessed Virgin appeared multiple times at Fatima. She would tell the children, come back on this day in a month, and I'll come again. And she said, you know, she told them specific messages and said that they should be released on like specific dates. All right. Now, some of the first 2 secrets of Fatima were a little more vanilla. They were things that you might expect, like say the rosary every day, right? It's like, yeah, that's classic Mary stuff. Say the rosary every day. All of her apparitions basically encourage Catholics to do that. She showed these little kids a vision of hell, which scared the crap out of them, okay? They were crying, they were really upset about it, and they begged her to be like, oh my God, like, we're not going to hell, are we? Like, please. So she showed these little kids, like, really horrific, like, scenes of that, right? But the third apparition, or the third secret, which I want to talk about in particular, is interesting for our times. So, the third secret, and this is written by Sister Lucia, who was the little girl there. She's now older, and there's all of this all of this stuff around her, like she's kind of had to go into hiding, or like they keep hiding her. They don't want her to talk about what happened at Fatima. They keep her on the hush-hush, and you'll find out why soon enough. Sister Lucia gave an interpretation of the third secret of Fatima, and she wrote, quote, "The third part of the secret refers to Our Lady's words, which were, quote, if we don't pray the rosary every day, etc., Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, causing wars and persecution of the church. The good will be martyred, the Holy Father will have much to suffer, various nations will be annihilated. If my requests are heeded, Russia will be converted and there will be peace. If not, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world." Now, what is Russia's big error? It's communism, in case you weren't clear on that. But I just thought that it's really interesting that whether you believe the apparition or not, that's all whatever. But for there to be a specific mention of Russia's errors as an evil that would, if not contained, would spread throughout the world, causing many to suffer and nations to be annihilated. It's like the Blessed Virgin Mary warned us about communism. Straight up, okay? So that was Our Lady of Fatima. If you're interested in that, that was a very Reader's Digest version. But there's a lot of information about that online. Watch the video of like the appearance in October. It's crazy, man. It's hard to get past what happened there. Again, approved by the Catholic Church. The next one I want to talk about is Our Lady of Akita. This appearance happened in Japan, okay? And this one is some weird, wild stuff, all right? So they have a Marian statue in this church in Japan. And one day, it starts crying. It starts tearing from the eyes of the statue, and there's photos of this. The artist who carved the statue was baffled and converted to Catholicism after, because he had carved it out of old dry wood. And he was like, there was no moisture in this. And it cried for like days and days. The sister, the nun, who had this apparition happen to her, got stigmata on her hands, which has been documented and all of that. But Our Lady of Akita, is even more dramatic than Our Lady of Fatima. And Our Lady of Fatima is pretty crazy, right? I mean, she's talking about nations getting annihilated, communism, all that stuff. But listen to this message from Our Lady of Akita, all right? In order that the world might know his anger, the Heavenly Father is preparing to inflict a great chastisement on all mankind. I should note that Our Lady of Akita happened in 1973. With my son, I have intervened so many times to appease the wrath of the Father. I have prevented the coming of many calamities by offering him the sufferings of the Son on the cross, his precious blood, and the beloved souls who console him, forming a cohort of victim souls. Prayer, penance, and courageous sacrifices can often soften the Father's anger. I desire this also from your community, that it love poverty, that it sanctify itself, and pray in reparation for the ingratitude and outrages of many men. I told you, if men do not repent and better themselves, the Father will inflict a terrible punishment on all humanity. It will be a punishment greater than the deluge, such as one never seen before. Fire will fall from the sky and wipe out a greater part of humanity, the good as well as the bad, sparing neither priests nor the faithful. The survivors will find themselves so desolate that they will envy the dead. The only arms which will remain for you will be the rosary and the sign left by my son. Each day recite the prayers of the rosary. With the rosary, pray for the Pope, the bishops, and the priests. The work of the devil will infiltrate the church in such a way that we will see cardinals opposing cardinals, bishops opposing bishops. The priests who venerate me will be scorned and opposed by their confrères. That's a fun word. Churches and altars sacked. The church will be full of those who accept compromises and the demon will press many priests and consecrated souls to leave the service of the Lord. Now, I just want to talk about this because do we have like fireballs coming down from the sky? No, obviously not, okay? You know what we do have, though? Bishops arguing with bishops, cardinals arguing with cardinals. We certainly have a situation where in the United States and across the world, the faithful, good and bad, are being deprived of the sacraments. In some places, you can't get confession. Catholics are dying, and they're not allowed to have their dying rites. They're not allowed to have a funeral. Okay? And the survivors will find themselves so desolate that they will envy the dead. Now, I'm not there yet, okay? I don't envy the dead yet, but I have to say that the kind of despair that is being caused throughout our culture right now is just so horrifying. I mean, millions and millions of people out of work, told that their jobs are non-essential, their professions made illegal. People are being told that they can't leave their homes. They can't go to the beach. They can't go fishing. They can't go to church. I mean, even here, even my priests are still, I don't know why, they're not fighting back against the governor and his restrictions on these 10 people only inside of a facility. We as a church, we've kind of lost our grit. And I mostly read these Marian apparitions not to be like, oh my gosh, it's doomsday. This is all coming true right now. But just to give you a little bit of, the one with communism, that one I just found really hilarious. I it tickled me so much when I looked into Fatima and found out that she was warning about communism ultimately. But the second one with Akita, people who are Catholic and who care about the church and who care about, Catholicism in general, I do think it's important that we pray for our priests, for our bishops, for our cardinals, and for our pope, because yes, the church has been through worse probably, and I'm sure this won't be the last crisis that the church goes through. But we are in a position where bishops are going against bishops, cardinals against cardinals. The church is in trouble. Our pope has questioned the divinity of Christ. Our pope has basically said that all of this stuff happening, like the virus, is a response from Mother Nature. Like it's a punishment from... Edgar made such a face when he heard that stuff. I love it. But it's true. It's like, you can believe those things, but I mean, you're the damn pope. Maybe you should believe that Christ was divine. I don't know. Maybe that's step one to being a Christian. Certainly step one to being the frickin' Pope. But I just, we have to wake up, man, or we're gonna lose everything. We're not in a place where we're so desolate where we envy the dead. But I mean, if these lockdowns continue indefinitely, we could end up in that place, man. They'll reopen and there will be no economy to open. There will be no businesses to open. There will be no producers producing things. Because the truth is, businesses can't afford to not have any customers for 3 months. They can't. And these people aren't selfish. Their businesses are how they make their living, And it's not just that the church is in trouble, but I focus on that a lot because religious liberty is really being trampled on. But it's not just from our governments, like it's from our own religious leaders too. So religious liberty is in more danger than ever. The Bill of Rights is in more danger than ever. And the Blessed Virgin Mary is like no fucking joke, man. Like, personally, I believe it. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure to what extent they're like prophecies, but I mean, I believe that the apparitions occurred. But man, people want to talk about her like, oh, like Mary, like she always has roses and whatever. It's like when she shows up, she is not talking about like daisies and butterflies. Like she's talking about um, kind of the punishments that the world brings upon itself. And even if you don't think that it's like a wrath of God thing, and even I'm not like entirely convinced this is a chastisement right now, but I certainly think that people end up with consequences from their own actions too. So we're getting the governments we deserve right now because we've been complacent. You know, we haven't fought back as they've been taking our rights little by little. We've just let it go. And the same thing with our religious leaders. You know, I have always said that any priest who sexually assaulted a child should have been excommunicated and put in prison, period. But instead we have a pope who took some of the priests and cardinals who, I mean, they were put in hiding. That wasn't really enough. But he took them out of hiding and put them back in their position of power. It's like, no, we're missing the plot, and Catholics are too complacent about that too. So the biggest message from all of this is to have some healthy distrust of your government, because that's the only way that you can keep your government accountable and make sure that they actually abide by the role that they're supposed to abide by. We've been terrible at it. Horrible. So hopefully we can be a little bit better. And with that, I will end my podcast, but I'll do my disclaimers before I exit. The first is that I want to thank Edgar and Guns for Everyone for sponsoring this podcast and making this podcast possible. If you're in Colorado and you want a concealed carry permit, make sure to take a class from Guns for Everyone. They do classes for free for concealed carry classes. But not that the sheriffs have been great on that issue of late, but in any event, Edgar does great things in that regard. So please support them any way you can. As soon as I get my rifle and my other stuff together, I'm going to take one of his classes myself to get a little bit better with my field, marksmanship. So please support Guns for Everyone if you can. If you want to support this podcast specifically, please like this video and subscribe. I realized that I finally have a URL. I think I might have said that already, but youtube.com/Nina Prevot is now my channel's address. Make sure to subscribe. Also, you can support me on Patreon. I want to thank my 2 patrons. I got another one. Nice. So Brett and Colin, thank you so much for being patrons. I really appreciate your support. Every little bit helps to make this podcast more successful every week. Anyone who does decide to become a patron, I will do a shout out for you. I actually finally got my shit together and made tiers on my Patreon. So go over there if you're considering becoming a patron. The lowest tier is only $2 a month if you want to help me out. I'm not doing it for the money though, just so you know. It's purely just to put more money toward being able to get this on other platforms, things like that. That's really the only thing I'll do with the money. But if you want to be a patron, it's patreon.com/Nina down the rabbit hole. I hope that you'll consider donating. I also have a Bitcoin address, which is in the description. But the best thing that you can do if you want to support this podcast is just share it with anyone that you think would like to hear it. And I'm grateful for everyone who listens to this and who enjoys my message of liberty and property rights. And I hope you all live free. Have a good week, everyone. Bye.